The divorce papers were sitting on my kitchen counter for 3 days before Marcus even noticed they were there. He walked past them every morning, poured his coffee, checked his phone, and left. 3 days. That told me everything I needed to know about how present he actually was in our life together, and everything I needed to know about how invisible I had become inside it. But here is the thing nobody tells you about moments like that, the ones that should feel enormous. They don't always arrive with noise. Sometimes they arrive like a change in air pressure, quiet, subtle, the kind of shift you feel in your chest before your brain has even caught up. That morning, standing in my kitchen, watching him walk out the door for the last time without so much as a glance at the papers that were ending 11 years of our life, I felt something I had not expected to feel. Relief. Not pain, not anger. Relief. Clean and steady, like the first real breath after a long time underwater. But I am getting ahead of myself. Because to understand why I was standing there, you need to understand where this actually began. And it did not begin with the papers. It did not begin with the lawyers, or the financial records, or the conversation on that Sunday morning that finally cracked everything open. It began with a voicemail. One voicemail, played out loud on a Tuesday evening in a kitchen that smelled like garlic and warm bread, while I was standing at the sink washing a pan I had used to make dinner for a man who was already somewhere else entirely. I am Sarah. I am an architect. I have spent my entire career learning to look at structures and find the places where they are quietly failing long before anyone else can see it. Load-bearing walls that have shifted a fraction of an inch. Foundations with hairline cracks so small you could miss them if you were not paying attention. I am trained to look for exactly those things. And somehow, for almost a year, I had been walking through my own marriage like someone who had decided the inspection could wait. Marcus and I met when we were both in our late 20s. He was sharp, funny, the kind of person who made a room feel more alive just by being in it. We built something together that felt real and solid and chosen. A home, a shared account. Habits that fit together like the parts of something that had been designed to last. I believed in what we had built the way you believe in something you have put your own hands into. Completely. Without reservation. Which is maybe exactly why I stopped looking. By the time that voicemail changed everything, I had already been ignoring small things for months without fully admitting it to myself. The way he started keeping his phone face down on every surface. The way certain questions, simple ones, would get just slightly too smooth an answer. No hesitation, no texture, just a clean, prepared response that landed a half-second too fast. I had filed all of it away somewhere I did not want to visit. Because when you love a structure, when you have lived inside it and built your life around it, there is a particular kind of courage required to pick up the tools and check whether it is still holding. And for a long time, I simply was not ready to be that brave. If this story is already making you feel something, if any part of it sounds familiar, stay with me. Share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe if you want to hear how it ends. Because it does not end the way you might expect. The voicemail was not dramatic. That is the part I keep coming back to. It was not breathless or secret-sounding or laced with anything that would read as obviously wrong if you heard it on its own. It was warm, unhurried, the kind of tone that belongs to someone completely comfortable with the person they are speaking to. She said his name once, just Marcus, and then she said she had left the thing he forgot on the table by the door, and that she would see him soon. That was it. 11 seconds. And yet those 11 seconds carried a weight that hit me somewhere deep and quiet, the way a sound carries farther over still water than it ever could over noise. It was not what she said, it was what was underneath it. Familiarity. The specific kind that does not grow from a few meetings or a professional connection. The kind that only comes from time, from repetition, from a whole version of someone's life that you are not part of. I stood there at the sink, pan still in my hand, water still running, and I did not move. I just let the sound of it settle into me. And something I had been carefully not looking at for a very long time came into focus with a clarity that was almost physical. Marcus walked into the kitchen 9 minutes after that voicemail played, smelling like soap and shampoo, hair still damp, and I was standing at the stove with a spatula in my hand as if nothing in the world had shifted. And the terrifying part, the part that stayed with me long after that evening, was how easy it was, how completely natural it felt to turn around and smile and ask if he wanted more pasta. I had not planned it. I had not told myself to act calm. It simply happened, the way your body takes over when something is too large to process all at once. Some part of me had already understood that whatever came next required steadiness, not reaction. So I was steady. I set a plate in front of him and sat across the table and listened to him talk about his day. A meeting that ran long. A colleague who had made a poor decision on some project. Traffic on the way home. Ordinary sounds. The kind of conversation that fills a kitchen and means almost nothing. And I sat there taking it all in. Not with anger, not yet, but with a new and uncomfortable kind of attention. I was listening the way you listen when you are no longer simply trusting. I was listening for the shape of things, the pauses, the places where his sentences moved a little too smoothly. And I found them. Not dramatically, just there, small and precise, like the hairline fractures I look for in concrete. Present, once you know where to look. He went to bed early that night. I said I had drawings to review and stayed at the dining room table with my laptop open, looking like a woman doing her job. And I was, just not the job he thought. I opened our bank application and logged in the way I had done 100 times before, looking for nothing in particular, or so I told myself. The account had always been something Marcus handled more than I did. Not because I did not care, but because I had trusted him to. I had signed off on things without reading them closely. I had accepted summaries instead of looking at the actual numbers. That is the kind of trust that feels like love while it is happening, and feels like something else entirely once the ground shifts beneath it. The screen glowed in the quiet of the dining room. The house was still. I could hear the faint sound of rain beginning against the windows, slow and irregular, the way rain starts when it is not sure yet how serious it wants to be. I scrolled through the transactions carefully, month by month, the way I read a blueprint, methodically, without skipping. And there it was. Not one thing, a pattern. Small transfers, modest enough not to catch your eye on their own, made with the kind of regularity that is never accidental. I sat there for a long time, not moving, just reading the same numbers over and over, as if the meaning might change. It did not change. It only became clearer. I did not sleep that night. Not because I was crying, not because I was falling apart, but because my mind refused to stop working. It kept arranging what I had found into a structure I could understand. dates, amounts, gaps, and the voicemail sitting underneath all of it like a foundation crack that explained why nothing else was quite level. Here is a thing about being an architect that most people do not know. The work is not really about building. It is about understanding what something can and cannot hold. Every project starts with the same question. Not what do you want this to look like, but what do you need this to carry? And sitting at that table in the dark with rain on the windows and 11 years of my life arranged in rows of numbers on a screen, I understood that I had been asking the wrong question about my marriage for a very long time. I had been asking what it looked like. I had not been asking what it was actually carrying. And now I could see the answer. The structure was not what I had believed it to be. It had not been for a while. The question was no longer whether something was wrong. The question was how far it went. And that question, I knew, was going to require more than a bank application and a sleepless night to answer properly. By morning, I had made exactly one decision. I was not going to ask Marcus anything. Not yet. Not until I understood the full shape of what I was dealing with. Because there is a particular kind of vulnerability in asking questions before you know the answers. It hands the other person the map of what you know and what you do not. And I was not willing to hand him that. Not anymore. I made coffee, I got dressed, and I drove to work in the early gray light, with the rain still going and my mind already moving toward the next step. I just did not know yet that the next step was going to lead me somewhere I had never expected to go. My sister Rachel found evidence of a second account before I even finished explaining what I was looking for. That sentence still stops me when I think about it. I had barely gotten through the first few minutes of telling her what I had found, sitting across from her at my dining room table with printed bank statements spread between us, like a map of somewhere I had never agreed to go, and she had already opened her laptop and started pulling threads. Rachel has always been like that. She does not waste time on the emotional part when there is a practical problem in front of her. She processes feelings later, privately, in her own time. In that moment, that quality of hers, which had occasionally frustrated me over the years, felt like exactly the right kind of love. She did not say much while she worked. Just small sounds, a quiet here, a slow exhale there. The kind of noises a person makes when something is confirming what they already suspected. The lamp above the table cast a warm circle of light over everything, and outside the window the neighborhood was doing its ordinary evening routine. A dog barking 2 houses down, the distant sound of someone's television, the particular quiet of a street that has no idea what is happening inside one of its houses. I sat across from Rachel and watched her face and tried to read it, the way I read blueprints, looking for the moment when her expression would tell me what the numbers were telling her. It did not take long. She turned the laptop toward me without saying anything at first. The screen showed a rental income account, separate from anything I had ever seen or signed. Under Marcus's name only. Not joint, not shared, entirely his. And the deposits going into it, modest, steady, consistent, matched almost exactly the transfers I had found leaving our shared savings. He had not been spending the money carelessly. He had been moving it, deliberately. Building something separate while I stood next to him in our shared life and believed we were building the same thing together. Rachel finally looked up at me. She said, "This did not happen overnight, Sarah." She said it quietly, not to hurt me, but because she needed me to understand the scale of what I was looking at. This was not a mistake. This was not a moment of poor judgment that spiraled. This was a system, and systems take time to build. I already knew that, somewhere beneath the part of me that was still hoping for a simpler explanation. But hearing her say it out loud made it solid in a way it had not been before, real in a way that my own thoughts had been carefully avoiding. I asked her how long she thought it had been going on. She looked back at the screen, scrolled slowly, and said, at least a year, maybe longer, based on what she could see. A year. 12 months of ordinary mornings and shared dinners and conversations about nothing important, and underneath all of it, a parallel structure being quietly assembled without my knowledge. I thought about all the times I had handed him the mail without opening it, all the times I had said, "Just let me know what to sign." All the small surrenders of attention I had made in the name of trust and the ease of a long partnership. And I understood something in that moment that I have not forgotten since. Trusting someone is not the same as seeing them. You can do one completely and fail at the other entirely. Rachel closed the laptop and looked at me directly. She asked me what I wanted to do, not what I was going to do to him, not how I was feeling, what I wanted. And that question landed differently than I expected, because the honest answer was that I did not yet fully know. I knew I was not going to fall apart. I knew I was not going to walk upstairs and confront Marcus that night with nothing but grief and a stack of printed statements. But beyond that, the shape of what came next was still forming. What I did know, clearly and without any doubt at all, was that I needed someone in my corner who understood not just the emotional weight of this, but the legal structure of it. Someone who could look at what Rachel had just shown me and tell me exactly what it meant for my future. And I already knew who to call. I had saved Claire's number years ago after a colleague mentioned her during a conversation I had not thought about since. I do not know why I kept it. Maybe you keep certain things without knowing why, the way a building holds certain materials in reserve, not because you need them today, but because some part of the design always knew the day would come. I picked up my phone that night and looked at her name in my contacts for a long time before I put the phone back down. Tomorrow, I told myself. First thing. But when I finally did make that call the next morning, what Claire told me in the first 10 minutes changed everything I thought I understood about my own situation. Claire told me that Marcus had been legally protected from the beginning, and that I had unknowingly helped him do it. That was the sentence that hit me hardest in her office that morning, not because it was cruel, but because it was precise. She said it the way a doctor delivers a diagnosis, directly, without softening it into something easier to hear, because softening it would not change what it was. I sat across from her in a chair that was slightly too firm, in an office that smelled faintly of coffee and paper, morning light coming in flat and pale through the blinds, and I listened to her explain how the structure of what Marcus had built was, in certain technical ways, almost careful enough to look legitimate. Almost. That word was the only thing in the room that felt like air. Claire was not what I expected from a family law attorney. She was quiet, measured, the kind of person who never raises their voice because they have never needed to. Her desk was clean in a way that suggested control rather than emptiness. A single framed photo turned slightly away from clients so you could not quite see it. A notepad with handwriting so small and neat it looked almost like print. She had reviewed the documents I sent her the night before and had already organized them in a way that told me she had been thinking about this before I even walked through the door. She explained that the rental account Rachel had found was structured as a sole investment vehicle, meaning Marcus had set it up in a way that, on paper, kept it technically separate from our shared finances. The transfers from our joint savings into that account had been made gradually enough and documented loosely enough that he could argue they were personal investment decisions. Not theft, not necessarily fraud, just choices made without full transparency. The distinction, she said, mattered enormously in a legal context. But here was the other thing, she continued, leaning forward slightly. The distinction only held up if no one looked closely. And now someone was looking closely. She asked me a series of questions after that, not about how I felt, not about the relationship, about facts, dates, account numbers, whether my name appeared anywhere on the rental property documentation, whether I had ever received any income from it, whether I had signed anything related to it that I might not have fully read at the time. I answered each one carefully, thinking back, reconstructing things I had let pass through my hands without examination. And with each answer, I watched Claire make small, precise notes, building something on that notepad that I could not yet fully see, but could feel taking shape. By the time we were done, she had told me 3 things I needed to hold on to. First, what Marcus had done was not untraceable. Second, the timeline Rachel had identified was going to matter more than almost anything else. And third, I had more options than I currently understood. That last one stayed with me on the drive home, sitting in traffic with the city moving around me in its ordinary, indifferent way. More options than I understood. It meant that somewhere in the structure of what looked like a closed situation, there were doors I had not yet found. And finding them, Claire had made clear, required one thing above everything else: patience. I drove home and walked back into the house and made dinner as if the morning had been unremarkable. Marcus came home at his usual time. We ate across from each other at the same table where Rachel had shown me the rental account 2 nights before, and I watched him pour himself a glass of water and talk about a project at work. And I thought about patience, about what it actually costs, about how it is not a passive thing at all, but one of the most active choices a person can make. The decision to hold still when everything in you wants to move. I was learning to hold still. And what I did not know yet, sitting at that table watching my husband talk about things that no longer had anything to do with the truth between us, was that Marcus was beginning to sense it. Not what I knew, not what I had done, just the stillness itself. And that stillness was starting to make him nervous. I noticed it first in small ways. The way he started lingering in the kitchen after dinner instead of going straight to his phone. The way he asked, twice in 1 week, if everything was okay. His tone careful, angled, like a question that is really a different question underneath. I said, yes, fine, tired from work, and smiled in the way that costs nothing and reveals nothing, and watched him decide to accept it. But he was watching me now, too. And that, I realized, was the first real shift in balance between us. For the first time in our 11 years, I was the one holding information, and he was the one trying to read the room. Marcus asked me to sign a document on a Wednesday morning, slid it across the breakfast table between the coffee cups like it was nothing, like it was just another piece of ordinary paperwork in an ordinary life. And in that moment, I understood exactly how far he had been willing to go. It was a refinancing agreement for the rental property, the one I was not supposed to know existed. He had printed it neatly, clipped it, placed a pen on top, and framed the whole thing with a casual sentence about streamlining some finances. He did not look nervous. That was the part that took my breath away for just a second. He had practiced this. He had stood somewhere in private and rehearsed exactly how to hand his wife a document that would have quietly transferred a portion of our shared equity into a structure that protected only him. And he had made it look like a Tuesday errand. I looked at the document. I looked at it the way I look at a blueprint when something does not sit right. Not rushing, not reacting, just reading. My name was there in 2 places, signature lines, both of them positioned at sections that, to someone not reading carefully, looked routine. To someone who had spent the past several weeks learning exactly what she was dealing with, they looked like the final piece of a plan that had been assembling itself for over a year. I picked up the pen. I turned it once in my fingers, and then I set it back down on top of the document and looked at Marcus directly and said, "I need to have my attorney review this first." The air in the kitchen changed instantly. Not dramatically, just a degree or two colder, the way a room shifts when a window opens somewhere you cannot see. He smiled, but the smile arrived a half-second too late. He said, "Of course, no rush, totally standard, just whenever you get a chance." And I nodded and folded the document and put it in my bag. And we finished breakfast, and he left for work, and I sat in the quiet of that kitchen for exactly 3 minutes before I picked up my phone and called Claire. She asked me to photograph every page and send it immediately. I did. 20 minutes later, she called back, and her voice had that particular quality it got when something confirmed what she had already suspected. She said, "Sarah, do not sign this." She said it clearly, without drama, the way you say something when the stakes are high enough that clarity matters more than anything else. She told me that the document was structured to reframe the rental property as a sole asset with a shared liability component, meaning if I had signed, I would have taken on a portion of the financial risk while Marcus retained sole control of the income. It was, she said, the kind of thing that looks almost reasonable until someone who knows what they are looking for examines it carefully. She used the word audacious. I remember that specifically because it was not a word I had ever associated with Marcus before that morning. And now, it fit him perfectly. Claire told me we were ready to move. She had said those words once before in our meetings, in a context that felt preparatory, like something approaching from a distance. Now she said them the way you say something that has already arrived. The documentation Rachel had compiled, the timeline she had mapped, the transfer records and the rental account activity, and the pattern of gradual financial separation, all of it, Claire said, was enough to shift the entire shape of the settlement conversation. What Marcus had built, thinking it would protect him, had instead constructed a very detailed and very clear record of intent. And intent, once documented, does not disappear. It becomes the loudest thing in the room. We filed the following week. I did not tell Marcus in advance. There was no conversation over dinner, no dramatic announcement, no moment designed for impact. Claire handled the formal notification through the proper channels, and Marcus received it through his own attorney, whom he apparently called within the hour. That was how I learned that he had already had an attorney on standby, which meant he had seen this coming too, or some version of it, and had been preparing his own position, while continuing to hand me coffee in the morning and ask if I wanted anything from the shops on his way home. We had both been playing a longer game than either of us had said out loud. The difference was that his game had started from deception, and mine had started from the moment I finally decided to see clearly. The settlement process took several months. It was not easy, and it was not simple. And there were moments inside it that required more steadiness than I knew I had. Marcus hired a strong attorney and pushed back on several points, particularly around the rental property income and the timeline of the transfers. But Claire had built something that held. The documentation was too specific, the pattern too consistent, the timeline too well established for his arguments to find solid ground. There were meetings I left feeling wrung out in a way that had nothing to do with the legal process and everything to do with sitting across a table from someone I had shared 11 years of my life with and negotiating the terms of how that life would now be divided. That kind of exhaustion does not have a clean name. It sits somewhere between grief and determination and refuses to choose one. What we reached in the end was fair. Not generous, not punishing, but fair, which was the only outcome I had ever actually wanted. The rental property income was split according to the timeline Rachel had documented, the period during which shared funds had contributed to it. The joint savings were divided clearly. The house, which had always mattered more to me than to him, I kept. Marcus took his separate account and his carefully constructed independence and the version of his life he had chosen over ours. And I stood in the hallway of a house that was now entirely mine and felt something I had not felt in longer than I could clearly remember. Stillness. Not emptiness. Not the silence of something missing, but the particular quiet of a space that finally belongs only to you. I repurposed the second bedroom into a proper home office. I bought a drafting table I had wanted for years and never justified to myself. I started taking on smaller, independent projects alongside my regular work. Things I found genuinely interesting. Designs that reflected choices only I had made. And slowly, without announcing itself or arriving with any particular drama, life began to take a shape that felt like mine again. Not rebuilt, not recovered, just mine. There is a difference between those things that I did not understand until I was standing inside it. Here is what I know now that I did not know before any of this began. A blueprint is only as honest as the person who draws it. Marcus had been quietly redrawing ours for over a year, adjusting lines I was not looking at, moving walls I trusted were fixed. And what I learned, not from anger and not from revenge, but from the slow work of paying careful attention, is that a structure built on a false foundation does not have to come down dramatically to be over. Sometimes you simply stop holding it up. You step out from underneath it. You let it be what it already was. And then you start drawing something true. I want to ask you something, and I want you to really think about it before you answer. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you stopped looking? And if so, what was the moment that made you finally open your eyes? Leave your answer below, because I think more people have lived some version of this than are willing to say out loud. If this story reached something in you, if it made you think or feel or see something differently, please give it a like and subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. It genuinely means more than you know.